I want to talk about supplier constraints. So suppliers are the people and the capital. Just think of it as capital, knowledge capital, human capital, different things that supply in industries, brings in the raw material. And so we need these suppliers in order to help the industry work. Right? And so these are the suppliers that either work for an organization or even work outside the organization. The kind of things I want to talk about first quickly are labor mobility. How do we get people? Where is labor? Can we get to the place where we need it? And then also the information technology and transfer. So these people have ideas, they have knowledge, and they have know-how, and how do we get that to the place where we actually need it? That is sort of in a technology transfer sense. So the three kind of constraints I want to talk about just as briefly are suppliers tend to favor their own interests, and we all favor our own interests, but suppliers have special interests vis-a-vis the organizations they might work for. They talk about the difficulty getting the kind of people that you need, that sometimes you need a certain kind of person, but that person doesn't make it easy to get that person, even knowing who it is. And the third thing we're going to talk about, the third constraint, is these powerful professions and guilds, things like unions and trade, like teachers, doctors, lawyers, those are the professions, and also the trade unions, and those kind of guilds that can be constraints to innovation. I'll talk to you a little bit about how that can be. So a big supplier constraint has to do with this labor mobility, that people may have the skills, but they may not be where we need them, or the skills may not even exist if it's a new industry, right? So they're creating this new industry called digital camera, digital photography, then there may not be people available who are experts who are able to bring in and help us do this thing called innovate around this new technology. Also, what are the motivations of people? Are the people who would supply you with their knowledge, with their motive power, are their interests aligned with yours? Usually not. What they're interested in is a long-term contract. They would like to be able to be stable, whereas what you're maybe interested in more is having a short-term contract and being able to swap people in and out and play people against each other. And the suppliers don't want you to be able to do that, to make suppliers compete with each other. Sometimes people are available, they just aren't willing to do it at the price that you're willing to pay. So besides labor mobility, we have this issue of information transfer. How do we find out what's going on in our industry, what other people are doing inside of our industry? And usually it's the suppliers that we're going to use to find that out. But what is their interest in telling us? Also, to what extent do they control what we can see or what we can't see? As a supplier, it's in my interest to not let you see too much about what I'm able to do and how I'm able to do it, right? Because I would like to keep that as a competitive advantage for myself, and that gives me bargaining power with respect to you. Also, sometimes we tend to look at suppliers for the information that we need, and if we're only using suppliers, we have to assume that that information may come in a biased way. And it's not that this is a nefarious, that is a real super negative, cynical conspiracy. It really is just to say if we just look at the interests are not aligned with each other, and they have an effect that they're going to move people in different directions. So the information transfer can really be a problem. Finally, we have this technology development problem. So one thing is to know how, so we could find the people that know, but how can those people actually do the thing that we need them to do in our context, in our organization? Because someone could do something inside of Kodak does not mean they can do the same thing inside of Sony. Nowadays, if you can do something in Apple, can you do the same thing in JCPenney, right? So we recently saw an executive move from the one to the other. And is the know-how translatable into this, what I'm calling sort of the do-how? Can we do it? Can we transfer that knowledge out of the supplier into ourselves? I want to talk about professionalization. Professionalization is when people begin to behave like what we call professionals. Professionals are a group of people that have a practice domain, a particular domain that society has said, hey, you can solve all the problems of a certain kind within that domain. So let me give the example of doctors. Like doctors have a domain that's called human health, and they're in charge of that. And they actually self-regulate, so if you want to be a doctor, you get licensed by other doctors to be able to practice inside that domain. Same with law, same with education, and so on. And so these are the professions as we call them. And what professions are able to do is they're able to control behavior. So they get to decide what it means to be a doctor and how it is that you have to behave if you're going to be a doctor, and how it is that you behave to not be a doctor. They have traditional knowledge bases, they have certain ways of doing things, and they have certain ways that they've been educated to do things. Proposing to do things in a different way may not be in the interest of the profession, and they become not interested in doing things in a different way. Professions can also engage in guild-like behaviors, and basically by having certification requirements, by controlling movement of people, through maybe degree requirements, even advertising practices. So for example, law firms are not allowed to advertise prices for services, and doing that can actually get you thrown out of the profession. And so these guild-like behaviors act to protect, to sort of reinforce what's happening inside the guild. And so as you can imagine, this does not really lend itself to innovation. That is, it does not push innovation to happen, because what the guild wants to do is sort of keep things the way they are. And by keeping things the way they are, they're able to maintain that power. Of course, there are going to be innovations, but the innovations are going to come in much more slowly. If we think about how innovation happens in the professions, think about it this way. You start out by learning, and so learning the art, I'm going to call it. So for example, I have a sister who's a doctor, and she had to learn the art of doctoring. And so she went through her undergraduate, then she went through medical school, she graduated from medical school, then she started doing residency, then she started doing fellowships. And so it takes a long time to get from the learning part to the mastery part. Once you master it, you're able to do practice. And so for her, that was a long process to go from learning through mastery, through practice. Maybe like a 20, 30-year period for doctors. And in other professions, it can take equally as long. So when you ask people in the profession to update, that is to say, okay, we're going to change how healthcare works, we're going to change how doctoring works. Well, that's a really hard thing if someone's trained to do this thing for 30 years in the way that they have, and also keep in mind that along the way, they've been told the deal is if you work really hard now, I know you'll be poor, I know you'll work really hard, you'll have terrible hours, but when you're finally able to practice, you'll be compensated for that, and you'll be well compensated for that. And so I did my part, I learned and mastered, and then and now I'm finally at practice, and now you want to change everything? Like, I don't want everything to be changed. And so this can be also part of what we see, the kind of constraint that we see from education, the kind of constraints that we see from law, the kind of constraints that we see from healthcare, in these kind of professions where there's a really long preparation period before someone is allowed to practice. Then the idea of the cost of update seems very, very high to them, and they're going to oppose it. On the other hand, if we think of innovation as it's called the profession of software engineering, right, where I learn something, by the time I learn something and learn, master, and practice in software engineering, I can go really quickly. So 14-year-old kids now are able to very quickly go through this cycle here, where they're able to learn something, apply it, and then master it, and then learn a new thing, apply it, and master it. And the cycles are so short here that even in these kind of professions, we might think of learning as part of the profession. You have to be able to learn quickly in order to stay alive, to be able to be a member of this profession. And so those would be the kind of differences that we'd see between the kinds of professions and the constraints that they pose as suppliers in an industry. And so again, supplier constraints, the goals for suppliers are really to increase the value of their expertise. That they have an expertise and they want to increase the value of it. We all do. We all have something of value, we want to increase the value of that. They're going to do it by controlling the labor resources, that is, who's able to be in that field, how they're able to get into that field, what they have to do in order to remain a member of the field. They're going to control knowledge flows. Often we have jargons and technical ways of having really a sort of, we call it secret information about how it is we do certain things. And also we're going to embed our value into proprietary systems. Let me say that in a different way, to say that if I know I have something of high value, I don't want to give that directly to my the organization that I'm a supplier to. I don't want to give them the value in a way that they can sort of disaggregate it and take it apart and use it to their own devices. If I give them the whole package in a way that they can't take it apart, then actually I've maintained some value. So my interest in innovation, in innovating, is innovating for myself in a proprietary system, and not innovating for the organization to which I'm supplying my value. So how do we overcome these supplier constraints? What can we do as a way of getting over or at least mitigating the kind of dynamics that cause suppliers to want to be not super open to our innovations? One thing we can do is not to outsource our core. Often we have to make a decision, in the development of an innovation, do we make a part of it or do we buy a part of it? Well, one thing to think about is how core is that piece to the value of what I produce? And so in terms of the digital camera, I have to sort of think about what's the most valuable part of that, and let me not supply that. Let me not outsource that thing. Let me make the things that are most important to me where I create value. Let me outsource the things that are not core value, that I can actually set up contracts where I can get suppliers to bid against each other for something. Also, we need to know the threat of our innovation. When we propose innovations, it's going to threaten our suppliers. And so what does it do to them? Does it make them feel like not professionals anymore? Does it drive down their costs? Does it drive up their costs? Does it drive down their profit? And if we know that, we're much more likely to be able to mitigate the threat. We might be able to understand how they're likely to behave with this innovation in mind. We want to share the returns to innovation. So when you innovate and you're able to get some advantage from your suppliers, can you share that? Can you share that with them? They're much more likely to go along with you to help you innovate if they understand that there's some return to that. So if the process is more efficient, so you need lesser of their services, maybe you can give them a higher price, or maybe show them a way that they can actually get more customers doing the same kind of thing. And then also, what are the costs of capital, and understanding the cost of capital. You know, what strings are attached when you take money from a bank, right? So a bank could be a supplier to you, supplies money to you. What strings are attached? Are there certain loan covenants, for example, that require you to have a certain amount of money in the bank? And if you have to have that money in the bank, you can't be innovating with it. And so those are the kind of costs that might come with the capital that you take in. Same with human capital. Well, that's a discussion of the supplier constraints. Now I want to move to the market, and we're going to talk about the kind of constraints that we face by being in a market.